choose to create a Metaverse apps platform? It's a very interesting question, right? Because the technology to consume metaverses have been around for a while. We've had the VR headsets from as early as 2013, 2014. iPhone has been supporting augmented reality for the last 5 years. Google, Android phones, a lot of them support augmented reality for a while now. But people don't use it on a day-to-day basis. That's quite interesting. The technology is around, but users are not using it. There has to be some gap, right? And primarily what I've realized over the years, it's not a technology gap. It is primarily a user behavior gap and the lack of access of content, the lack of access of use cases. That's the problem. Here, the simple example I typically end up giving is that of YouTube. When YouTube first started, they created a marketplace for recording videos and uploading them, right? So if you land on YouTube and there are no user-generated videos, what will you do there? Right? It's the same story with Metaverse. The Metaverse technology and the ecosystem exists, but there is not enough content, use cases, games, apps, what have you, for people to consume metaverses, and hence users are not experiencing AR and VR on a day-to-day basis. And that's the gap that I wanted to solve by creating a platform where people can create metaverses within minutes. It makes it really easy for anyone to quickly create those metaverses and consume them and distribute them and consume them as a web-based URL that you can use on any portable device. That's the challenge that exists today in enabling people to transition into the metaverse, and hence I chose to build a Metaverse apps platform. Who will benefit the most by using your platform in the Metaverse? It's a tricky question, because it's like asking who would have benefited with an operating system or a smartphone or an automobile at the start of that technology's life cycle. As an entrepreneur, I would end up thinking, who would not be benefited? Right, and it's a function of time on who adopts technologies like the metaverse sooner versus who adopts them later. Just to give you an example, at the moment we are seeing a lot of interest in industrial use cases where the assets, the processes, the systems, the equipment, they're very expensive, they're deployed remotely. Their downtime causes a lot of pain to all the stakeholders. It takes a lot of effort by a lot of people to bring these assets, make sure they're up and running consistently. These are typically the segments where they're seeing an immediate value of the metaverse, because by monitoring these assets or their processes, work instructions in the metaverse, users are able to ensure higher uptime, right? Vis-a-vis, let's compare that with apparel and retail. It's a phenomenal use case, but the fodder, the input from apparel, from the retail perspective, is not as straightforward vis-a-vis enterprises. Now, what do I mean by that? So if you're looking at apparel as an example, there is not enough 3D content that exists with the brand, with the retail store, to transition into the metaverse today. Right? That might happen 1 year later, might happen 3 years later, might happen 3 months later, but today it does not exist. But on the other hand, for industries, it exists. And hence, for core engineering companies, this is a natural and quicker transition versus a retail use case. On the other hand, of course, gaming has been around for a while, and we are seeing enough entertainment coming from the gaming side of things into the metaverse. So the point here being, there are some sectors that will adopt sooner, some sectors that will adopt later, but all users will benefit by transitioning into the metaverse. Today, it is core engineering companies with critical assets deployed remotely. Tomorrow, as more designers transition into the metaverse, become 3D first, retail, fashion might transition. And hence, every sector would have a timeline to transition to the metaverse. So everyone will benefit. Depending on the time scale, it will be different users. Where has the metaverse helped most in enterprises? Typically, enterprises take technology adoption slowly, and hence the adoption would be targeted on low-hanging fruits. Now, which are these low-hanging fruits in industries? What we have discovered in enterprises, what we've discovered is in the area of operations primarily. While at first glance it seems like training is an obvious no-brainer, but honestly, at least in the markets and the sectors that we've operated in, there doesn't seem to be a lot of budget to focus for training in the metaverse. And so that's a false low-hanging fruit, or rather a low-hanging fruit with very little ROI. But the area where we are seeing low-hanging fruit, quick wins, is in the operations side of things. Now, take any sector, be it process manufacturing, like in oil and gas, or a sector like aerospace, aircraft inspections, or another sector where you perform automotive maintenance. In all of these cases, the ability to ensure uptime is key for the operations team. And that translates into better revenues, lower downtime, better brand recognition and recall, or trust in the brand. This is an area where people are willing to explore technology to achieve better results, better operational efficiency, better productivity, better traceability, better quality control. These are areas where businesses are willing to try and adopt metaverse, and hence we are seeing traction within the operations space across multiple sectors. When will metaverse become critical for every industry to implement? But for industry to implement metaverse, it is a gradual process. Criticality is not a switch that you just turn it off and it becomes not critical, and you turn it on, it becomes critical one day. It's a gradual adoption process, right? Because industries are heavily process driven and in a lot of instances heavily regulated. Adoptions do not happen overnight. How adoption would work for industries is one step at a time. It's an incremental adoption and evolution, where you identify one use case, show a little bit of ROI, expand on it, show a little more ROI, expand on it further until one segment or an entire function of a business has been using metaverse for a few years with substantial ROI that it can showcase. And that's when not substantial, adjacent verticals within a business would adopt them as well. So it's more of an incremental approach where over a period of 2 to 3 years, people would slowly adopt metaverse use cases to define ROI. And after a few years, one would realize that the entire business function has changed and metaverse has become the default, and one would not be able to remember what they were doing earlier. That is the way metaverse would get adopted. Talking about which industry would adopt it first, that is a function of the raw materials or the inputs that you would give to the metaverse. Especially sectors that are physical asset driven, they would probably adopt faster than, let us say, sectors that, for example, a cloud storage or a cloud service provider. They have commodity hardware, but they have a lot of volumes. They might need it less vis-a-vis someone who has bespoke hardware and few units, very expensive, deployed remotely. So the lot the rate at which folks would adopt, or the speed at which the sector would adopt, would depend on some of these factors. But the adoption itself would happen gradually, and at some point after a substantial amount of the business has adopted metaverse is probably when it becomes crucial. It is definitely not an overnight transition. How does the metaverse in the future look like? So let me be quite categorical here. A metaverse is not a dystopian future that you would see in Hollywood. You know, even 100, 120 years ago, when newspapers became a thing, people had this wildly crazy theory saying the kids will get spoiled, quote unquote, by reading newspapers. The same thing goes for radios, televisions, games, the internet as well, smartphones, right? So clearly metaverse is the next technology wave, and very clearly it is not a dystopian one. But the future for metaverse is primarily in the area of in the areas where we spend a lot of cognitive load, for lack of a better word, where we spend a lot of time reading and processing things in our mind. Right? That is one area where metaverse can change the amount of time it takes for a person to process by just showing content in 3D. If I have to process, for example, changing the third gear's fourth nut from the north side with a spanner with so much torque, right? Reading that, processing it in my mind, and then executing an action versus just seeing it and following instructions, make it far more quicker for us to achieve better results and do far more complicated jobs more efficiently and achieve first time right. This also holds good in schools. It's much easier to showcase the Pythagorean theorem in real time and it show the value of the theorem with real examples versus drawing a right angle triangle and asking kids to imagine, or asking kids to take a few leaps forward. I as in school could not make those many leaps. Now I do understand and appreciate, and I'm sure there are sections of the population which would want visual examples. And of course, humans are visual creatures. Humans learn better experientially, and metaverse can make those experiential content, knowledge, information register better. The recall is better, the assimilation is better as well. And any area where information is very expensive in terms of processing, metaverse makes it more easily accessible. What is the future vision for the internet with the metaverse? Now, when we consume content on the internet, we typically look at our smartphones, our computers, tablets occasionally, but the one thing that's common is all of them is the scroll website. So you have your app and you scroll through it, we call it doom scroll. You do the same with the tablet, you do the same with the laptop, and everything is built around scrolling. But with the metaverse, the concept of scroll will not exist, because you're essentially building infinite number of worlds around you. And how do you interact with the world around you? How do you interact with the real world? You walk around, you hold the knob of the door, you open the door, you walk through the door, and that's the same with the metaverse. So you won't be on a website, you will be in a metaverse, right? So if I'm selling automobiles, for example, I will not be in an automobiles website. I will be in a dealership for that automobile or for that brand. That is how you could think of metaverse, or rather internet changing, with metaverse becoming more and more mainstream, or rather device making metaverse more and more mainstream. Same thing goes for work. I will not log in, I'll be inside my workverse. I will, go to my gymverse, and I'll be immersed in gymverse while working out from a different physical location. I'll be hanging out with my friends in a friend's verse, sitting at home, but I hope that we will also end up catching up in person. I don't look at this as a cure-all. It would just be like how smartphones would be, but instead of a device with a 2D screen, you'll have a 3D screen. So that's how I see the internet changing in the world of the metaverse.